Hello, everybody, and welcome in. I am your host, Garrett Daigle. With me, as always, is my co-host, Caleb Armstrong. We are your Titans of Fantasy Football podcast, and we are excited to be here again with you guys for our 10th episode. We're going to keep steamrolling through these divisions. We've made it through a good chunk of them so far, and now we are getting ready to talk about the AFC North today. We're excited because we're stepping back into a powerhouse division here with some good fantasy stars. But also we decided to sprinkle in some extra content for you guys today. We are going to be hitting you guys with our top 10. So guys at the top of your drafts, who should I draft in the first round? Big question mark. So, this is something that a lot of guys are keying in on as you get closer to August and get ready for your drafts. Who do I draft in the first round? Caleb? How are we doing today?
This is going to be fun, guys. Like Garrett said, we're trying to mix up things a little bit differently to start every podcast for you guys, give you some new content. Because right now, like I said, we're just going through divisions and stuff like that. But news is important, I would say, right now, but it's definitely a lot more sporadic, a lot more happening when the season gets closer and closer. There is some more news coming out now that minicamp is getting started, but not much that we're going to cover today. Well, like Garrett said, we're going to give us your top 10, or give us the feelings of our top 10. And for right now, guys, these are pretty, I would say the top 10 might have some mixes up here and there, but these are probably going to be pretty close to what we're going to have right before the season starts, too. I don't see much change here in either of our rankings. Maybe a little bit sprinkled in here if something like injury or, if something else happens like that. But so we're going to kind of go through and we're going to give you guys our first 5. We're going to kind of rank them and then talk about them. Me and Garrett can compare a little bit, and then we're going to go through the last 5. And then overall in general, and just kind of throw in some honorable mentions too that we feel like could slip in that top 10 range.
Yeah, guys who are worth part of the conversation at least.
Yes. So, Garrett, I think I'll give you honors here. I'll let you start off with the first 5.
Yeah, all right. My top 5. I have Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Dalvin Cook. So, Taylor, 2,100 yards last year, 20 touchdowns, RB1. Cooper Kupp, he only had 3 games last year where he had less than 10 targets, was just a monster week in, week out, all season long. But in those 3 games, he didn't get the 10 targets. He still finished with 95 yards and a touchdown in all of them. He's a monster. Christian McCaffrey, Henry, and Cook, 3 guys who've been at the top of your draft leaderboards for several years now. They're household names, and they've been around. I feel like that top 5, you got a lot of powerhouses there. Guys who are big-time fantasy producers.
Yeah, for sure. These are the guys who are putting up big numbers week in, week out. And that's how Garrett feels about my top 5. Mine's a little bit different with some couple guys mixed in here. It's my top 5. I have Jonathan Taylor at 1. And this is not me saying, guys, that he's going to finish 1. I truthfully don't know, but I think he's the safest pick at 1 right now. There's 2 other guys who are just Cooper Kupp or Christian McCaffrey, I feel like also. And I have McCaffrey at 2 and Kupp at 3. So those 2 guys, I feel like could be that first. I would be fine. Like I mentioned a couple of other episodes, but they're, especially with CMC, he got that injury prone. That label's on him now, so it's kind of questionable. And Kupp, I really wanted to put at 2, guys, but a little part of me just thinks he's going to be a little less with Allen Robinson this year. I'm a little higher on Allen Robinson than most, and I just feel like it's going to be taken a little bit away of Cooper Kupp. And then I have Justin Jefferson at 4 and Austin Eckler at 5. And guys, just wanted to refer back. We're doing all of our rankings off half-point PPR. Same thing we've been doing all of our division breakdowns on, all of our rankings off that for the ECR rankings. We're doing this based off of half PPR standards. Some guys might jump up if it's full PPR or go down if it's standard. And that's just what we're doing. So, because that's what the most common leagues, it seems like nowadays, are half PPR. So, yeah, Garrett, I got 2 wide receivers in the top 5, and I see you only have 1. So,
yeah. So, what were your last 2 there at the end there for your 4 and 5?
Oh, Justin Jefferson and Austin Eckler.
All right. So, just to recap for you guys: Jonathan Taylor, McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Austin Eckler. So, Caleb switched it up on me there. He's got Jefferson up at 4.
Yep.
What do you got there? Let's hear your reasoning.
Justin Jefferson, finished as a wide receiver 2 last year in PPR scoring. And from everything we hear, and that was in a run-first offense, guys. The Vikings were run-first last year, for sure. Dalvin Cook got a lot of carries, and when games he wasn't in, Alexander Madison got a lot of carries. It doesn't matter. They're focused on running last year. And everything we kind of hear this year is things are going to be spiced up a little bit more with Kevin O'Connell now as a head coach. He was a Rams offensive coordinator, if you guys didn't know. Rams passed the ball a lot last year. And right now it sounds like everything we're hearing from little whispers is Vikings are going to be airing the ball out. So personally, me, I love Jefferson. He's been great since he came into the league. 2 years, he's been top 10 wide receiver both years. And I feel like he's not going to go outside the top 10 again. I feel like he's going to finish as a top 5 wide receiver for a while here, and bearing any injuries. And that wide receiving core is good, but like Adam Thielen isn't going to be stealing a lot of yards, I don't think, away from him. Adam Thielen is getting up there in age now. He's a big red zone type guy. I still feel like he'll get a lot of touchdowns. And then we had a little bit of emergence with KJ Osborne last year. And I think Jefferson is still going to get a primary target share in that offense. And I feel like it's going to propel him up to this where he should be getting drafted this early. I think he's a very safe option in the first round. And I feel like he's going to be very good week in, week out.
Well, and if his first 2 years are any indicator, he's only moving up and up. He's an absolute monster.
Yeah.
All right, so the bottom half of my top 10, 6 through 10 here, I've got Austin Eckler, Justin Jefferson, so 2 guys you just had, Jamar Chase, Devante Adams, and Nick Chubb. And I guess just to kind of recap a little bit that's going on there. Nick Chubb and Devante Adams are 2 guys that might squeak into your top 10 rankings on your home leagues, and they might be a little bit out. I feel like Jamar Chase, Eckler, Jefferson, those guys are probably solid options in your top 10 for most leagues. But Adams, I think even moving over to Oakland, he's got that college comfortability with Derek Carr. Those guys went to school together, and he's moving into another offense, but Carr's been shown year in, year out. He can support these wide receivers if he has a stud on his team. I think Adams moving over there, he's still a safe option for you. And Nick Chubb at 10, even in half PPR, when he's out on the field, he runs every single season. He's been over 5 yards per carry. So if we want to compare him to a guy like Najee Harris, who was just under 4 yards a carry last year, if both of them get 200 touches, Nick Chubb's getting 1,000 yards, and Harris is only getting 800. So with the volume he gets week in, week out, when he's on the field, even with that offense kind of changing and the question marks surrounding the quarterback position, we know that they are run first and run heavy always. So I think Nick Chubb is going to be one of those guys that if you have him on your team this year, he's just going to be a solid rock week in and week out. And he might not get you that passing volume, but he could get you the rushing yards and stats that Jonathan Taylor got you last year. It's within the scope of his possibilities. So that's why I got him there, and I've got some other honorable mentions. But Caleb, why don't you hit us with your 6 through 10?
All righty. So my 6 through 10 are Derrick Henry, Najee Harris, Stephon Diggs, Dalvin Cook, and then Travis Kelsey sneaks in at 10 for me. And then, so the reason, yeah, this is a little different than Garrett's. The whole shape mismatch of it all. We actually don't have any guys in the 6 through 10 rankings that are the same. Like, there's nobody in the same category there. Garrett's got some guys up in the 1 through 5, or in his honorable mentions, I have. So it's kind of different than here. So it's messed up. Henry at 6. I feel like I should have put Derrick Henry higher up on my board. It just felt wrong having me putting him down here. But it sounds like he's healing well from his foot injury, but we just don't know exactly. And eventually the age bug, I guess you could say, or age, is going to probably start showing on Derrick Henry. He's one of the older running backs in the league right now who still gets a lot of touches. I mean, a lot. But I don't think anybody is there in the backfield that's going to steal it from him. Hassan Haskins is basically a mini-me, a very cheap version of him, so I don't think that he's going to get money hulking any touches, and I don't think Dontrell Hilliard is either. And then I have Nadja Harris at 7, like I said. And this one, like I said, it was tough for me to rank here at this point for some guys. I wanted guys in the top 10, and I just couldn't figure out where to put them here. Harris, the only reason I have him here, and I'll kind of not explain too much right now because I'll explain a little later in the episode, but there's reasoning why I have him at 7. And then Diggs, I feel like is very good, but I feel like he's underrated at how good he is, especially since he's joined the Bills. First year, he joined the Bills. He exploded. Had a great year. And everybody was like, last year drafted him real high. And people felt like they weren't getting what they should have out of Stephon Diggs. And I think that's what it sounded like in the Twitter world. And I think that's crazy because Diggs was so good last year and so consistent. I think that's what people hated about him. He didn't have any huge weeks, but he also didn't have any bad weeks. Stephon Diggs ended the year with 103 receptions on 1,225 yards and 10 touchdowns. So he actually had more touchdowns than the year before. But the year before, he just had more catches and more yards. That was his big thing. And he had a couple huge weeks. Where last year, I think he averaged almost 17 points a week. And I think the variance of that wasn't much. I don't think he had many 20-point, 25-point games. But I also don't think he made 10-point games. Like, it was a very steady Eddie. And he is one of those guys that is just going to be in the same role again. He got a huge contract. We talked about the target share in Buffalo right now with maybe Gabe Davis is huge. Maybe he's really good. But there's a lot of vacant targets there still right now. And Stephon Diggs got the bank. So he's going to be utilized in that offense again. And then Dalvin Cook, he deserves top 10 every year. Even though he does miss games, he still finishes as a top 10 in his position, it seems like. He's so good when he's with the ball in his hands. And then Travis Kelsey, I put into 10 because 2 years ago, Travis Kelsey had one of the best tight end statistical seasons of all time. He finished as a tight end 1, but also if you would have took his tight end numbers and put them wide receiver numbers, he would have finished as a wide receiver 3 that year. So it just tells you how crazy he can be. And Tyreek Hill's gone. And they have no other proven pass catchers in that offense. So you would expect Travis Kelsey just to get peppered with targets. And I think that he is going to be very, very good again this year. He is older, but I don't think that matters for Kelsey. He hasn't shown any signs of slowing down yet. So he deserves to be up in that rankings. And I think he's going to finish as possibly the tight end 1 again this year. And I think if you would, like I said, change his stats over again, he's going to finish as a top wide receiver, just receiving stats in general. Yeah. So, and then just sprinkle that in there.
Kelsey's just such a monster out on the field, and with Hill being gone, he has the potential to just absolutely explode.
Yes.
But, we've seen it year in, year out. But he does have the age factor where it's like Father Time catches up with us all.
Yes.
So at some point, it's going to happen.
All right. Since Garrett, I think his Ruma went off again, I will talk to you guys kind of about my honorable mentions here. And these are guys that, I can probably sprinkle in the top 10. Might be moving around here a little bit here and there. And with that, I have Devontae Adams. I have DeAndre Swift. And I have Jamar Chase as my 3 guys who I feel like all could possibly be in that range. And Jamar Chase, it felt wrong not having him in the top 10. But I also, if you kind of look at the last half of the last year's stats, again, I'll kind of cover this a little bit later on in the episode. Him and T. Higgins were so comparable in the fact of the stats. And Jamar Chase proved to be a bigger points per week guy because he had some huge weeks. But then he also had a couple down weeks. Then he had some monster. He's going to be good. Jamar Chase should take another even step possibly forward. This offense is going to be electric again. And he would be the one that if I were to sneak somebody else in there or that I think could take a top 10 role, I think it would be Jamar Chase out of all my honorable mentions.
Yeah, and on my end, my honorable mentions, I told Caleb before the episode, I'm like, man, it feels like right at 10, there's like 5 or 6 guys that I could squeeze into that same area that are
Yes.
all kind of the same tier for me, which, we talked about tier-based drafting a few episodes back, but it's like I have Nick Chubb at 10 and Devontae Adams at 9, but also like on my honorable mentions, I have Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Stefan Diggs, Travis Kelsey. Caleb already made a point for 3 or 4 of those guys, and it's like I really like DeAndre Swift this year. I know he wasn't able to play as many games as you would have hoped his first 2 seasons, but he caught a wild amount of passes, and he's going to be a good part of their identity in Detroit. Joe Mixon, finally was able to put together a complete season, and if he can do it again this year, he's going to be a monster again.
Yes.
Harris, Diggs, and Kelsey, all 3 of those guys are going to be volume monsters. So
Yes.
it's just like I'm pretty happy to be at the turn this season is what I'm getting at more than anything.
Yeah,
because
I
if
like
I can
the
gobble up
later
2
ends.
of these guys.
Yeah, later end of the drafts are good right now. I feel like you can put a very solid team together.
Yeah, and it's like you look at the top 5 or 6 of the draft. There are guys that they've been bona fide studs for a while. McCaffrey, Henry, Cook, Eckler, but Eckler is getting a little bit older, and those other guys have had injuries in the past few years. So it's like you are getting the more of a bona fide superstar with those guys, but they come with a lot more risk, I feel like, than the guys who are, maybe not as high of an upside, but, down at the end of your first round of your draft, it's like, ooh, I like being towards the turn this year. And it's like, not every year is like that.
No.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think we're going to get into our breakdown here. And the first team we're going to be covering is the Browns. Garrett, I think we'll roll with the normal strategy here. I'll let you go through kind of the rankings of the Browns and position breakdown.
Yeah. We covered this a little bit last episode, but we're going to give you the ECR, the Expert Consensus Ranking. We grabbed this from Fantasy Pros, and I'll give it to you for each position. So we'll start here with the quarterbacks. We have Deshaun Watson at QB 29, Jacoby Brissett at QB 38, and newly signed Josh Rosen, who I don't even think he's ranked right now, but they added him just today, actually, just because of the looming suspension that everybody kind of knows is coming for Deshaun Watson right now. Browns also have at running back Nick Chubb at RB8, Kareem Hunt RB30, and Dearness Johnson down at RB70. Wide receiver is Amari Cooper at wide receiver 22, Donovan Peoples-Jones at 76, and David Bell at wide receiver 82. And then at tight end, they have David Njoku at tight end 22, and Harrison Bryant at tight end 38.
Alrighty. So once again, guys, we'll be going through our pass system. Pick, avoid, sleeper. And this team, so Browns for me, Garrett, I was going off my rankings, and I was going in my head, because right now nothing's happened with Watson. Yes, there's a potential suspension going, but I was in my head going with Watson is on the team. He is a starting quarterback. So that's what I was going with my picks. So that's kind of
that's interesting. So
that's where I based.
And I took a different approach. So you guys can kind of, you can get 2 sides of the coin here, because I feel like the suspension for Watson is almost guaranteed at this point. And I feel like it's going to be a minimum of 6 games, but probably I think it's going to be at least 8. And that's just been the reports that I've been seeing out on Twitter, online, following experts and people who are a lot more connected than we are. So I kind of base some of my interpretation of the rankings and where guys are at based off of that. So, you guys can take that as you will, but you'll get at least 2 sides of the coin here.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll start here. I talked about this guy a little bit earlier, but my pick for this team is going to be Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb at running back 8. I have him in my top 10 at 10. And that being considered, it's like you look at the identity of this offense the last few years. Ever since Stefanski came over and, they started actually putting together a competitive team, they have been run-focused philosophy. They want to move the ball through the ground, and Nick Chubb has been over 5 yards per carry every season. Last year, he did struggle with having a little bit of, he had a few games he was out, right? And, that happens every year with running backs. I would assume that most starting running backs tend to miss between 1 and 3 games every season. And that's not totally off the wall. But Nick Chubb, year in, year out, shows that he's going to be a focal point of this offense. And last year, even missing three games, he was still able to chop up 228 yards or 228 carries for 1,200 yards. So that's 5.5 yards per carry. And the year before, he was at 5.6 yards per carry. Those are top of the league numbers. And, every season he's also turned out at least 8 touchdowns, which is, steady. You have an option out in front of you there where you're getting steady fantasy production. And he's not super involved with the passing game, but even if they end up having to go with Jacoby Brissett, that's even more incentive for the team to be more run-focused, and they also have one of the best offensive lines in the league. So where he's going at RB8, I think it's very appropriate, and in that range where you're drafting him, you're going to end up with a guy who is a very safe fantasy player. And, we always say you can't win your draft in the first round, but you can lose it. And I feel like Nick Chubb is the kind of guy that if you pick him, you certainly aren't going to lose it. You're going to end up with the top fantasy running back. And he's just going to be a steady option for you. I guess to kind of continue through my pass here, David Njoku at tight end. He's going to be my sleeper for this team. We watched this summer as they shipped out their other tight end on the team. So Njoku's going to have a little bit more of a starter role to step into. He was drafted in the first round, and they hoped he would be a lot more involved in his first few years than he has been. But really, he, being in the spot he does on this team, last year the Browns were 4th in tight end targets as a team in the whole league. So that's very high in terms of league standings. Not many teams really get their tight ends as involved as the Browns do. And with Austin Hooper gone, I mentioned that before. With Austin Hooper gone, Austin Hooper is a pretty decent tight end. He dealt with some injuries while he was with the Browns, but now that he's out of the picture and he's with the Tennessee Titans, all of a sudden that opens up a lot more possibilities in this offense. Now we also look at the departures of Odell Beckham being traded last year, Jarvis Landry being moved this summer. Amari Cooper is the only bona fide, actual NFL starter on this team. And David Njoku, even at tight end 22, and even with Jacoby Brissett as the starter, could be the number 2 passing option on this team. So, and I like Kareem Hunt to sprinkle in there for getting some catches, but I think Njoku has a really good chance at, gobbling up a lot of targets. So, I think he could be a really good sleeper for you. And then kind of the other side of that same coin is Amari Cooper. Right now, he's being drafted as wide receiver 22. I think after hearing more and more about the Deshaun Watson news, it makes him feel like he's a little bit risky in that area. So other wide receivers going around the same range, you have Brandon Cooks, Cortland Sutton, Hollywood Brown, Allen Robinson, who Caleb talked about really liking earlier, Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney, Rashad Bateman, all guys who either are really good number 2s on their team or number 1s that are on a good offense. So, if you're looking to get the upside that you would hope with Amari Cooper in that range, having him and not having Deshaun Watson at QB makes it tough. So it makes it tough to get the return that you'd hope out of him. I mentioned Njoku as a sleeper, but that's for the tight end position. The fantasy output you need out of the tight end position is hoping you get 10 or more points a week. Out of the wide receiver, you're hoping for 14, 15, 16 points a week out of these guys. So it's much, much different for what your expectations are. And so I feel like at wide receiver 22, personally, I would cool off on him a little bit more, and I would probably have him closer to the 28 through 32 range, closer to like your Elijah Moores, your Juju Smith-Schusters, like guys like that.
I think that's pretty good. Yeah, like I said, it's kind of cool to see you have the Jacoby Brissett side, which it's very, very likely that's going to happen. And me kind of going with because right now, like I said, nothing has happened with Watson. So it's tough to judge what these guys are actually going to do. And with Watson, obviously we've seen Watson play, and he is a very, very elite quarterback. I mean, Watson is in that elite, he's in that top tier when he plays. And so if he does play, that offense is dynamic. And right now, though, the Browns are really, really, really set at running back. They have a very good running back room. Tight end room's kind of question mark. And wide receivers, like you said, besides Cooper, are really question marks. And so my pick, actually, for this team, and this is kind of regardless of quarterback, actually, this one guy is Kareem Hunt. Right now, ECR, like Garrett said, is at running back 30. Kareem Hunt last year, the first, I think it was 6 weeks before he got his injury. He had a pretty significant injury last year. He missed about 6 weeks, I think it was. He missed too. He was RB5. And that is with Nick Chubb splitting carries there. So, Kareem Hunt, though, too, the year before, also finished in the top 20 running backs. Kareem Hunt is a very solid RB2 to have on your roster. And Garrett, this is the one thing I'll ask you about Hunt and Chubb. Who gets more affected by injury? Who has a lot larger role if one gets injured? Nick Chubb?
Absolutely, it's Hunt. Because it's like Nick Chubb, if Hunt's injured, then it's not like Chubb is ever going to get the catches that Hunt would have. And
no.
Also, like Hunt, even when both of them were healthy to start the season last year, Hunt was getting 10 to 14 carries a game. And that's like enough to sprinkle in some good fantasy production. We've seen plenty of guys throughout the years who can get that 10 to 15 carries. And if they have the catches to match, they can have really good fantasy production. You saw it with Aaron Jones. You saw it with,
Tony Pollard.
Yep, yeah, that's great. So there's just a lot of opportunity like that. And also, like, you really, it doesn't take as much. So Alvin Kamara, his rookie season, came in and did the same thing. It's like, and not to say he's as electric as those guys, but that's the kind of example or template you're looking for. Kareem Hunt has done this for a couple of years now over there.
Yes. And so, and one thing with Kareem Hunt right now is there's been possible rumors of one of these running backs, not Nick Chubb, but either Kareem Hunt or Dearness Johnson has a good chance of getting shipped, it sounds like, and traded. It sounds like all three have proven to be very good running backs. Dearness Johnson when he filled in, has been a very good fantasy running back and running back in general. So I could definitely see one of these guys getting moved, which would affect all their ADPs, I would think. And so my avoid actually is Nick Chubb. And the only sole reason being is if Watson's there, they are not a run-first team like they have been. They have been pound the rock with Baker. And now you get a quarterback like Deshaun Watson in there who is a runner himself and is a way more dynamic passer than the previous quarterbacks that Nick Chubb has played with. Nick Chubb, guys, has played with Tyrod Taylor and Baker Mayfield his entire career. And then sprinkled in Case Keenum and whatever other backups are there. So none are huge pass catchers or big offensive pass throwers. So you get a guy like Deshaun Watson in there, they're still going to get the touches for Kareem Hunt, and they're still going to get touches for Nick Chubb. But I don't think Nick Chubb is going to be the center point of the offense like he has been the past 3 years, I would say. And so now I think that reduces more of his carries per game. Yes, Nick Chubb, when he gets the ball, is a straight line runner. But he has no pass-catching upside, guys. He's been in the league long enough to know that he's not going to get you points, too many points. You can't rely on him to go out there, get 5 catches a game. It's not going to happen, especially with Kareem Hunt still in that offense. So I feel bad putting him in the void. But so this is the only thing, and another reason why, is he falls around guys like that are dynamic pass catchers. That's the problem right now. He falls around guys like DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, and Saquon Barkley. Those are all the guys, 2 above him and 2 below him. So all those guys are decent to good runners, but excellent pass catchers. Leonard Fournette, he stepped in that category since he's joined the Bucs, has become a very dynamic pass catcher. Saquon Barkley, good pass catcher, obviously. Aaron Jones could have huge year pass catching. And so that's where this half PPR plays a huge effect in that role of why I would, like I said, I feel safe with Nick Chubb on my team, but I feel like those guys can bring up another level with just that pass catching. So that's why I have him as my void. Not a super big void, like I'm not drafting him, but I'd rather pick one of those guys before him. That's all I would say. And so my sleepers, Garrett, I had a hard time choosing sleepers because I had 4 on this team that I liked.
Really?
Yes. And none of them are huge, though. You talk about one, David Njoku. I like David Njoku. Like you said, he's a very solid chance to step in that number 2 in the receiving game. My other one was Dearness Johnson, who I kind of mentioned, and I think he will get shipped. It sounds like possibly Falcons are kind of a team that are like, if he lands in Atlanta, that is a great spot for him. And definitely, but also Dearness Johnson, he's going as an RB70, like Garrett said in ECR right now. That is free. You're getting him off waivers. But if one of these guys gets hurt, he automatically steps into a role. When Kareem Hunt was injured last year, he still got carries with Nick Chubb. They were side by side. The Browns OC, he likes to run that dual RB backfields. And so I think even regardless, he'll get some carries if one of those guys gets injured. He's a high-end replacement. And so he's not my actual sleeper, though. So, sorry, I'm going a little off a tangent here. But my sleepers are, I'm gonna split it. My number 1 sleeper on this team is whoever wins the wide receiver 2 role. So between David Bell and Donovan Peoples-Jones. And so they're both pennies right now. Donovan Peoples-Jones goes just a little bit before David Bell. Peoples-Jones, known as a deep threat, showed some good weeks last year with Baker, actually. He's a big play guy. And then you got David Bell, who before the combine was projected to go end of the first, early second, was supposed to be one of the top wide receivers in the draft, had a horrible combine. But like Garrett and I say, we like guys who have proven more than they are like in the combine. And David Bell is a proven wide receiver in college. We don't know about NFL yet, but he was in the Big Ten. We saw him at Purdue. He was right next to Rondale Moore, put up really good stats next to Rondale Moore, who was a first-round selection by the Cardinals last year, or second round. Might have been second round, yeah. And so David Bell went in the 4th round this year, guys. 4th round of the draft. He really, really fell. And I think he landed in a great spot, though. If there's a place for him to step up, it's right now. There is nobody at that wide receiver 2 locked down. So I feel like whoever wins that battle as wide receiver 2 is the guy I want for my sleeper.
Yeah, and I think those guys really, with the wide receiver room completely turning over, there's such a good opportunity for somebody to step in that role, especially how far down they are in drafts. So if the Watson suspension is shorter, then those are guys that you can really, get for a cheap cost right now. Or if, you're looking later on in the season after week 8, or if it's an 8-week suspension, or after however long that ends up being, maybe it's 0 games. We don't know yet. But those guys could return value later. So they're guys that you want to watch out for. And even if they're underperforming to start the year, grab them up before that suspension ends because they could really turn dividends. All right. That being said, let's keep her moving here. We're going to jump on the Bengals next. Caleb, you want to run through them for us?
Sure. Quarterback, we all know Joe Burrow. ECR ranking of 7 right now. Running backs are Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, and Chris Evans. Mixon is ECR 6, Perine 65, Chris Evans 101. Wide receivers are Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. Chase is 3, Higgins is 11, Boyd is 52. And then the new acquired tight end is Hayden Hurst. And he's at 25. Sorry, I got a sneeze coming. So he's at the ECR rank of 25. Bengals, obviously, the Super Bowl losers last year, but probably one of the most high-powered offenses in NFL right now, Garrett. A lot of talent on this roster, a lot of fantasy relevancy, too. And so, Garrett, I think I'll have you start off again.
Okay. So this offense, obviously the Bengals went to the Super Bowl last year, got some good primetime games in, and they showed that they're a bona fide, powerhouse offense. We talked about Joe Mixon early on in the podcast, like a guy we like, and that the fact that he finally turned it around and had a good, strong, healthy season. I like him this year. I think I like where he's priced at RB6. But I kind of want to shift my focus in this portion. So my avoid is going to be the other running backs in this offense. So last year, Mixon, for the most part, other than a few odds and ends, he carried the bulk of the load. And with Samaje Perine, he was sprinkled in a little bit more as the RB2. But Chris Evans, if Mixon were to go out, we saw a little bit last year where Perine wasn't necessarily handed the whole role. So it's tough to know if you're looking for a handcuff in this offense. I don't know that Perine's the guy, and I don't know that Evans is the guy either. So it's too tough of a situation to try and guess who would be the one who would step in. And even if that happens, I feel like the Bengals would just shift their offense to being more pass happy than they already are. Mm-hmm. So my avoid is going to be those two running backs, and they also don't add a whole lot extra right now. Perine was a little bit of a pass catcher last year in certain instances, but I just kind of want to avoid that situation altogether. I'd rather take my dart throws at some other spots later on in the draft. My sleeper this year is going to be Tyler Boyd for this team. I liked Hayden Hurst coming into the offense. Tyler Boyd right now is being drafted as the wide receiver 52. And it's just a little bit disrespectful, to be honest.
Super underrated. Underrated.
He's had a couple of 1,000-yard seasons under his belt. I know it was before Chase and Higgins got there. But last year he finished as the wide receiver 31. The year before he finished as the wide receiver 35. Now he's being cast off wide receiver 52. So we all know Chase had a breakout season last year, and Higgins, really turned it on strong. Chase came on last year, high draft pick. He's gotten all the spotlight. But Boyd still managed to turn out like a pretty solid season. For those who don't know, he ended up with 67 catches on 94 targets. 94 targets, almost 100 targets though. 828 yards and 5 touchdowns. I don't necessarily think that his touchdown numbers are going anywhere because, even when he was the focal point of the passing offense, the most touchdowns he ever got was 7. But the last 3 years since then, he's had 5 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns. But, where he also is at is he had 2,000-yard seasons, and then he's had 2 800-yard seasons the last 4 years. I don't think it's I don't think it's a crazy idea for there to be 3 1,000-yard receivers on this team this year. I think, with the way this offense is going, another year with a healthy Burrow and a better offensive line.
Completely refurbished.
2 big pieces out of this summer.
Yes.
I think a little bit more patience and time for Joe Burrow is going to mean better passing stats. And we watched defenses key in on Jamar Chase down the stretch last year. Higgins opened up his game a little bit more. And Tyler Boyd playing that slot role could end up being the beneficiary in a good flex position for you throughout the season. So at wide receiver 52, pretty good sleeper.
Garrett, I don't interrupt you here. Who is even their wide receiver 4? I used to be Auden Tate, but I don't know who it is now. I'm just saying, I don't think Boyd has any, even chance, a wide receiver 4 is going to even compete there for targets.
Right now, their depth chart says Mike Thomas, Stanley Morgan, and Trent Taylor.
Okay. All right. That's just what I need to know. Yeah. I think, like you said, I think those three are going to be on the field a lot, and I don't think there's going to be anybody else really sprinkled in.
Yeah, you're not looking at a whole lot of other rotational players coming in this offense outside of those three guys.
The really big, I like your pick on Boyd, and I've always been a big fan of Boyd. He's super underrated. If one of these guys go down, he steps into a huge role. Tyler Boyd could, if one of these guys gets a serious injury, which would suck, Tyler Boyd could turn into like a league winner type. Like he is got that already chemistry with Burrow, and like you said, he almost has 850 yards both seasons basically with Burrow. So he's there. He just does almost 100 targets. So you take him, one of those guys go down, he gets an extra 30, 40 targets on the season. Yeah, he's up there in the wide receiver 20, 30 role. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And, that's it. It's an easy segue from that point to say, like, all right, looking at these three wide receivers, the guy I like as my pick is Joe Burrow. So Joe Burrow right now is going as the QB7, which, it's an appropriate spot for, his performance last year. 4,600 yards, 34 touchdowns, pretty solid. Didn't add hardly anything through the ground, but he also tore his ACL the year before. I wouldn't expect that to be a big part of this game. But the comparisons I want to draw is you look at the way his first season went. He came out, he was looking really good, and then last year really blossomed, brought the team to the Super Bowl. He has three really good receiving options. And somehow we have Justin Herbert, who also blossomed his first 2 years, all the way up at QB2. I love Herbert. I think he's great. But I also think there's a good shot that, Joe Burrow down at QB7 can kind of do the same thing that Herbert's been doing the last 2 years.
Yep.
Herbert's gone out and he's blossomed. Burrow could have over 45 touchdowns next year, and it wouldn't surprise anybody after his performance leading up to the Super Bowl. So where you're getting him, he's also just before Dak Prescott, just before Tom Brady. He's after the running quarterbacks of Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. And I think, those guys with their rushing ability, they do offer a little bit more stability at the position. But Joe Burrow is a franchise quarterback, shown he is a stud. And so at QB7, I like where he's going in drafts. And the stability with his receivers give him, a really good platform and model for success.
Yeah, I totally agree. Joe Burrow, we're going to see him in the NFL for a while, bearing any serious injury. So I'll hop over to me, Garrett, here. And my pick, I went with an easy pick. And it's not Chase, like I said, he's the top 10. And the only reason, like I said, is I want to talk about this, is I like T. Higgins at 11. And it's crazy to think you could have two wide receivers on the same team, possibly go top 10, as for picks. But these two guys are so dynamic, and they're different type players. Chase will be a big yak, and he can take the top off a team, where T. Higgins is a great possession receiver, will get you your touchdowns, and just the way it goes. The only reason I am liking Higgins a little, not more than Chase, but the reason I like Higgins is because last year, at the end of the year, Joe Burrow got hot. So I just want to let you guys know, Joe Burrow was quarterback 16 halfway through the season. And then he just kind of, and I think it was kind of shaking the rust off of his injury. He didn't have a full rookie year. He had a half of a rookie year. And so shaking that rust off, getting back in, and then that offense just exploded. That's why they went so far and made Super Bowl. But T. Higgins averaged more targets per game than Jamar Chase. And Jamar Chase obviously did a little more with his targets, but it wasn't a whole lot of difference in the yards. If you guys look at the receptions, Higgins had more receptions. Chase had more yards. Higgins actually had more touchdowns in the playoff push, though. So that was kind of big for me to notice. And Higgins was averaging almost 17 points a game there. And he had a huge game, Garrett, if you remember that, right at the end of the year. I think he had 3 touchdowns or 3 or 4 touchdowns, I think it was. But yeah, he just had a huge
12 catches, 194 yards, 2 touchdowns, 37 fantasy points.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about, yeah. So he kind of just, took the top off of everybody there and had a big game. And like I said, I think it's going to be either or for these two guys. I think it's going to be whoever faces is still going to do very good, but whoever faces the QB or the CB1 that week, the other one's probably going to have a better week. But it all depends on the whole defensive scheme they're facing, too. Like we saw Jamar Chase just destroy the Chiefs. So,
I think, like, as a fantasy manager, you're sitting here looking at the situation, hoping you have a Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Anquan Bolden, Larry Fitzgerald kind of situation. Yeah. These guys both look like studs, and you're right. Higgins was just a monster.
And Higgins, you can get at the near end of the second round. Mm-hmm. So that's where the value is there for him. It's like I said, you get a good wide receiver at the second round there. In my void, I really didn't have one. I put Burrow as my answer, but I don't really feel like too comfortable with that take, like I said. Only reason because he had the great ending. That's the only reason why he ended up at QB7 last year, and that's the main reason is because that ending, he just went off on a rampage. But like I said before that, it was kind of bad, but I think it was mainly just shaking out the rust. But it's because I would wait for a quarterback. That's why, I said, Burrow is at 7. I feel really comfortable grabbing a quarterback around the 12 to 13 range. So Matt Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. I think, and you're getting them 2 to 3 rounds later. So that's the biggest reason why. My sleeper on this team is, I'm happy you mentioned him, but you didn't talk about him, is Hayden Hurst. And Hayden Hurst steps into a huge role, guys. CJ Uzomah went down, and Uzomah was productive last year. Garrett actually texted me right before this, right before we were doing the thing. He goes, I didn't know Uzomah tore his ACL in 2020. He had he did a pretty good year last year. It's a bounce back year.
And what totally blew my mind there was it was his Achilles that he tore. So we've been sitting here talking about these guys. Who's torn their Achilles? Who's torn their Achilles and come back? Uzomah did it. Holy crap! And he was actually productive down the stretch last year.
Uzomah had some huge weeks, guys, last year. He would just have some big games where he had a couple touchdowns. And I'm not saying Hayden Hurst is going to do that. I think Hayden Hurst is a better tight end than CJ Uzomah for fantasy production. Hayden Hurst, first-round draft pick, guys, by the Baltimore Ravens, got beat up by Mark Andrews, who was also a third-round pick in the same draft. They double-dipped that year. And he's kind of been – I feel bad for Hayden Hurst because he's shown that he could be a reliable tight end and a good target. But he goes to the Falcons, and he goes on at was a loaded receiving room with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones and Russell Gage, and then he's stuck at the wide receiver 4 the fourth receiving option. Then last year he goes there and they draft Kyle Pitts in the first round, so he gets booted down to tight end 2, and he still was somewhat fantasy relevant actually though. And now he goes, guys. It is like I said, Garrett and I are talking about just offensive passing attack, but also Joe Mixon's great, just offensive onslaught of a team. And he is probably going to end up as the 4th receiving option again, but the guy's going to get targets. There's going to be teams who are going to hone in on these wide receivers or try to, and Hayden Hurst is going to be a nice little safety valve over the middle for Joe Burrow. And he is good in that role. I think he will fit very good in this offense. He's one of my top sleeper tight ends. He's one of those guys that if I do my double dip, he's a guy I'm targeting because I can get him last pick. That's where he's going, guys. That's where he's classified as a sleeper because you can get him at round 12 or later. He's going at ECR tight end to 25 right now. So he's a guy that I like if I'm doing the double dip or I'm not drafting a tight end. Got to panic, gonna grab a guy. He's my guy. So
yeah. I think he really does fit the definition of a good sleeper guy because he is down there in the drafts and like you said, there's so many guys that defenses have to focus in on this offense that he could just be the guy who squeaks out for a little short slant pass and ends up with a decent fantasy outing week in, week out. Where at the end of the year, you're like, hey, he's going to end up being RB or tight end 10 through 17, and give you some valuable weeks in between.
I saw a stat last night, Garrett, and I wanted to add it in here because it was just to benefit my sleeper a little bit. And when I was doing this, and the past 3 years, tight end has finished in the top 5 who's been drafted outside of the top 20. Ooh. So that just tells you guys with tight ends. Last year, can you guess who it was?
Who would it have been?
We've talked about him earlier this year. He's right at the bottom of our tier 1.
Oh, gosh.
It's Dalton Schultz.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the year before that was Logan Thomas.
Yeah.
And I think the year before that might have been Andrews. Because I think that's the year. I think that was the year Hurst was supposed to be the guy, and Andrews came out and became the guy. So that's what I think it was. It might have been not Andrews, but I think it was. That's what I think.
Andrews might have been the year before because he's been in the league for several years now.
Yeah.
All right.
So
speaking of Andrews.
Yeah, speaking of Andrews, we're going to hop into our next team, and it's the Baltimore Ravens. So, and definitely a different offense than we're used to seeing, I would say, with the Baltimore Ravens. A little bit, some trades this year, some injuries, and Garrett and I will kind of dip into our picks on this one. And Garrett, I'll let you go over the team here.
Yeah, so at quarterback, Lamar Jackson at QB4, Tyler Huntley backing him up at QB 44, but he was pretty good in his games he jumped in last year. Running backs, they have J.K. Dobbins at RB 23, Gus Edwards RB 45, and Mike Davis added late this spring at RB 74. Wide receivers, they have Rashad Bateman at wide receiver 29. Then way down the list, we have Devin Duvernay at 114 and James Proche at 133. So big deep dives for those guys.
Huge drop there.
Yep. Tight end, Mark Andrews. He's tight end too, but he finished as the number one last year.
Yeah.
I feel like the Ravens started out as a team that I kind of liked to target some of their guys and some of their ECRs, their draft positions, and now I feel like the coin has started to flip for me.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Wishy-washy because I see value in some positions. But then there's guys who at their value, I'm like, nah, I'll move elsewhere. And so I'll lead off this here, Garrett, with the Ravens, and my pick, not gonna get out of the box on this one. I'm gonna make it sweet and simple. Mark Andrews put up one of the best statistically tight end seasons last year. He was a monster. Had some huge weeks. Most guys that probably were in the playoffs in fantasy probably had either Mark Andrews, Travis Kelsey, or one of the top tight ends on their team, and he carried throughout there too. He had some big weeks in the playoffs too last year. And he steps in now, and he more than likely is going to be the receiving threat number one on this team. He's probably in the same position as Travis Kelsey, where he should be that first guy that gets targeted. And they lost Hollywood Brown, who put up his best year statistically ever, and now they expect Rashad Bateman to fill in this wide receiver one role. And Bateman was good last year. He's a first-round pick as a rookie, but he missed half the year. Mm-hmm. And the thing that people aren't really talking about is that half of the year he played, Lamar Jackson was not in a lot of those games, Garrett. The chemistry he was building was with Tyler Huntley. It was a little bit here with Lamar Jackson. He played a couple games with him, but it was mainly with Tyler Huntley. So that's a big thing to look at that not a lot of people are talking about. And I do like Bateman actually at his ADP right now and his ECR at 29. But Andrews at 2, you can get him in the middle of the second round. Me and Garrett talked about we did our mock draft. It's worth it to take at that high. Yeah. He's a bona fide stud. Garrett, like he said, Garrett's talking about bona fide superstars. Mark Andrews is a bona fide superstar. And he is, if you're trying to get one of these top tier tight ends, he is a great one to hold on your roster.
Yeah, and right now, too, also, you're seeing him get drafted after Kelsey, and there's a good argument both ways for those guys. But
yeah.
In my opinion, that's the kind of situation that I want whoever's drafted later.
Yeah.
I feel so strongly that both of them are great. I don't think that one of them is so head and shoulders above the other going into the season where it's if you get one a half round or a round later than the other guy, that value is great. So, especially if you start off your drafts early with a guy like Jonathan Taylor, maybe you're at the start of the draft and then following up with a Mark Andrews, that's a nice way to start your drafts.
Yeah. And so this is where things get interesting for me because Ravens are a lot like the 49ers in the aspect of that they like to establish the run. They pound the rock. Ever since John Harbaugh has been the coach, they are one of the most run-heavy offenses in the league. And last year was a little different, though. They took a big dip. That's because they had major injuries, guys. They lost their top 3 running backs within a day, all torn ACLs. It was crazy, just a freak accidents. And so last year they had a lot of mixed match backfield. This year, I think it will be a little different. We're hearing some good/negative reports coming out of camp and mandatory camp too. And so my avoid is actually Dobbins. And I do think could be some value at his spot right now at 24. But, we get the report from Ian Rappaport that he might be put on the pup list right away. And then he comes out, he's like, source me. No, I hopefully will be ready by week 1. And I do think, though, that he's supposed to be like, the number 1 running back in this offense. I think John Harbaugh brought in Mike Davis kind of as like a safety valve type guy. Because Mike Davis, we've seen guys be relevant in fantasy, especially when he took over for Christian McCaffrey. That was a good year for him. But Mike Davis could be like a guy who gets a couple carries here and there to fill in that role while Dobbins heals. I don't think we're going to rush Dobbins in. And so he's my avoid. He's ECR 24 right now. But there's just some guys that have some higher upside around him again that I like better at that spot. You got Travis Etienne, Breece Hall falling right around the same spot. Those two guys are bona fide probably RB1s on their roster right away this year. And both have big receiving upside too. And then, A.J. Dillon even right there. A.J. Dillon is so safe as running back 2 on your roster. Mm-hmm. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are a great tandem together. Not just saying this because I'm a biased Packer fan, but they both literally have finished good the past 2 years. And Dillon showed a little bit more at the end. I just like them guys better than Dobbins right now.
Yeah, Dobbins started out as one of those guys that I saw late in that round, and I'm like, that's good value where he's going. Oh, coming off the injury, he was injured late in August last year, so he's had a full calendar year to recover. A little bit longer than Gus Edwards, maybe by, a week or 2.
That was a day.
What?
No, Gus Edwards was a week after. Sorry, yeah.
Well, either way, both those guys coming into the season, you would have hoped that you would have had enough reports coming out that they were healthy by now. So hearing that, he may or may not be ready for week 1, it's like, man, it's not what you wanted to hear going into the season, especially with the guys he's getting drafted around, like you said.
Yeah.
He opened as like a target for me, and now he's just like I'm so cooled off on him. That's actually a reason that Mike Davis is my sleeper.
Oh, okay.
And looking at it was like, man, this running attack, there's too many questions around Dobbins and Edwards. Mike Davis you can get with one of your last picks, and he might open as the week 1 starter.
Yeah. And so I'll get my sleepers here, and I got my deep dive, and I've talked about him a couple of times here. And he's my deep dive sleeper, guys. This is something to look out for. If they don't bring a veteran, I got a feeling they'll bring in a veteran presence at that wide receiver role to fill in that wide receiver too. But James Proche is my guy at my deep dive stash, and I'm not going to dig too deep because he's not my main sleeper I want to talk about. But the fact is, right now, guys, he is wide receiver 2 on the roster, and they came out he is going to be wide receiver 2 to start the season. So that's just something to look for because he's going to get targets if he's the wide receiver 2. But my actual sleeper, Garrett, is I'm happy you put Mike Davis because my actual sleeper is Gus Edwards. Mm-hmm. And because he has come out with reports that he is going to be ready. So I've heard more positive reports on Gus Edwards than I have J.K. Dobbins, put it that way. And Gus Edwards, guy, even if both Dobbins and him are ready, Gus Edwards is going to have a role. And Garrett, I took a look at the stats here for Gus Edwards. Last year he didn't play, guys, because he tore his ACL right away. But he was drafted in 2018, 3rd round pick. So that's when I think they traded for Mark Ingram, or they signed Mark Ingram, was in 2018, I believe. And Mark Ingram was very good that year, if you remember that first year he came. Then they drafted, or might have been 2019 they drafted brought in Mark Ingram, because I think 2020 was when they drafted Dobbins. Yeah. And so Dobbins then in 2020 probably led that backfield, you could say, but it was like a 3-split tandem, if you remember, between Ingram, Dobbins, and Edwards. So Gus Edwards, guys, he's been in the league for 4 years, only played 3 years. 2018, Gus Edwards had 137 attempts on the ground, 718 yards, 5.2 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. 2019, 133 attempts, 711 yards, 7 touchdowns. 2020, 144 attempts, 723 yards, 6 touchdowns. He has over a 5-point. He's got a 5.2 yards per carry average. Mm-hmm. He is locked in at that role, Garrett. He is going to be a 1 and 2 down back for them. I feel like, and he's going to just need a breather. Yep, get Gus out there. And I don't think Mike Davis is going to overthrow him if he's healthy at that role.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect Mike Davis to overthrow him, but the Ravens also run like top 3 most rush attempts in the league every single year. So grabbing a running back in this offense, regardless of where they're at, you can end up with a guy who's a steady performer for you.
Yeah, and I guess a name to look out for, this guy is all on camp, is to see how this whole running back room fills out. They did draft Tyler Beatty out of Missouri, 6th rounder. And he coming into the draft, he was projected to go a little higher. And out of Missouri, supposed to be a big back, or not a big back, but like could do it all type deal. And the thing is, with all 3 of these guys, Garrett, Mike Davis, Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins, not a single one really has much receiving upside. Probably, who would you say has the most out of all of them? Maybe Davis. Davis had some upside with Carolina, but nothing with Atlanta.
I feel like Dobbins could do it if called upon, but Lamar isn't a guy who passes to his running backs anyway. So if Edwards is healthy, guys, he's my sleeper. He's got to lock in at a role. Yeah. So and he got a pretty good extension. So he got that 2-year deal where he got some money. So yeah. It's funny you brought up James Proche there too. So one of the stats I pulled up before this episode, just trying to dive into who could potentially fill in as this wide receiver 2 on this team. So Devin Duvernay had a higher snap count last year than James Proche. He was in on 51% of the snaps. Rashad Bateman was in at 68, so a little bit more involved, and James Proche was down at 32. Now, that being said, James Proche made a lot more out of his attempts out on the field than Devin Duvernay did. So they have a fantasy points per 100 snaps, and he actually performed higher than Rashad Bateman even did. So definitely a guy you want to watch out for. He's getting drafted so low, 133 wide receiver.
Yeah,
so.
He's not getting drafted.
Not getting drafted. So on this team, I'll just start off with Lamar Jackson as my avoid. Right now he's going as the QB4. I feel like we still have our blinders on a little bit from 3 seasons ago. He was the MVP of the league.
Yeah.
He took the fantasy season by storm and blew things up. But since then, his last 2 years, he was QB10 and he was QB15. He doesn't pass the ball a lot. So what he does with his legs, you're not getting even that much of a base level with how much he's passing. So like you already start with a QB who throws less than 3,000 yards a season and less than 30 touchdowns. And it's like, last year he threw 16 touchdowns. The year before he threw 26. I have a feeling his MVP season is more of an outlier passing-wise than we're ever going to see out of him. So even if he does return back to that 1,000-yard rushing form, you might only end up with a guy who, at his peak, can only get you maybe QB3, QB4 upside at the end of the season. And that's where he's being drafted. So It's like, why draft him at his peak when there are guys who are so much further down that you could have more upside with? So it's like, even right after him, you have Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts. It's like, all right, those guys are getting drafted later, several rounds later, and you have as much upside, if not higher. They don't rush as much, but their passing is much, much, much better than Lamar Jackson. So he's an avoid for me. I did see, there were some photos going around of him bulked up coming into camp, and that is a positive sign to me. I think, he was always a string bean, so as a rushing quarterback, being so swift and agile, him adding a couple pounds on, getting a little bit stronger, is going to help him stay on the field more, hopefully. And then you kind of hit on it, so I'm not going to hammer on this too much. Mark Andrews is just such a locked-in pick at tight end 2. I do like Rashad Bateman, where he's at stepping into the wide receiver 1 role. But even, we did like the performance that Hollywood Brown put on last year. He was very serviceable on a lot of weeks. And Bateman as the number 1 could really return value at wide receiver 29. And I already kind of mentioned on Mike Davis being my sleeper. I like him at his spot where he is. I mean, you're getting him so cheap where, people might forget that he even signed there. So we'll see how these injuries play out. And, if Mike Davis gets a little bit of a sprinkle and roll in that rushing offense, as much as, this team went through so many injuries last year, it's possible that some of them pop back up and some of these guys aren't ready. So Davis could be a good guy there.
And another thing is, Ravens lost Bozeman, who was probably considered one of the better centers in the league last year. And they got a bona fide stud who just fell to him in the draft in Lindenbaum from Iowa.
Yeah.
And that is I think this offensive line has been good and will continue to be good too. So it doesn't really matter who the running back is. Whoever the lead running back is, or 1A, 1 B, you're going to want to share if the Ravens offense. They give the ball to the running backs a lot. Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray were both relevant last year, and they're pretty aged. They're pretty long in the tooth, as Garrett likes to say. So, and I think all 3 of these guys could be more improved than what we saw last year.
And they always say when you add an elite center to an offense, which we don't know how great Linderbaum is going to be yet, but he was the top center in the draft. But when you add a center that is a higher tier, it does benefit your rushing game a lot more than it typically does your passing game. And Linderbaum was touted as a move center, so a guy who he gets up out of the stance, he helps run out of the blocking scheme and get ahead of these running backs. So he fell into the right offense for him, and this running offense could continue to be as great as they have been.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will get us into our last team here. Garrett, I will let you go through again the Steelers, and right. I feel like this is probably I before we get into positions here. Steelers, I feel like Garrett, their ADPs are lower than I would expect on some guys, and I feel like there's some value in this offense.
Yeah,
and it's because I think the values are down because of quarterback play. We don't know what it's going to be like. I think that's the biggest question mark there, and so I think that's why guys' values dipped. But I do like the Steelers for some value. Before I get into my thing, I just wanted to say that. So,
all right, and I'm going to hit this before we start as well. So last year they had Big Ben his last season with the Steelers. He threw 605 passes, which was the 6th most in the league. 6th most. So 32 teams right up at the top for passing attempts. With that, he only had 390 completions. Not a great completion percentage. He had 3,740 yards, which was 15th in the league. So with this many passes, he ended up with middle-of-the-road yardage. And he also had 22 touchdowns, which was also 15th in the league, middle of the road. So you have a guy who threw so much that performed well below what his attempts should have been. So that's kind of a precedence for how not great Big Ben was last year.
Yeah.
So, we Steelers at QB this year, they have Mitch Trubisky, QB 31 ECR, and Kenny Pickett, 34. So Kenny Pickett, first QB taken in this draft. Mitch Trubisky was 3rd overall a few years back. Gets out after having a mentored season in Buffalo, which they had a lot of great things to say about him there.
Yeah.
Running back, we have Najee Harris at RB7, and backing up right now is Benny Snell at 113.
That's such a drop for a handcuff. Just crazy.
Yeah. Same kind of thing, though. Their handcuffs their RB2s were just not involved last year.
No.
Wide receiver, leading the charge is Deonta Johnson at wide receiver 18, Chase Claypool at wide receiver 44, George Pickens at wide receiver 77, and Calvin Austin down at wide receiver 126. At tight end, they have Pat Freiermuth at tight end 12. So, yeah, like Caleb said, this was an offense where you're looking at some of the rankings and there's some value there. It's almost like, we got to the point where we said, hey, they brought in two new quarterbacks that, guys aren't super high on, but is it really a step down from what Big Ben was last year?
Yeah. So I'll get into it right away with my pass. And, yeah, I wanted to touch base on that because I think Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett is actually an upgrade from Big Ben. Big Ben, guys, had no arm the past 2 seasons, and definitely last year had no arm. His yards per throw, like downfield, were like the lowest that he ever had in the NFL. And so it just proves that some of these guys should see a little uptick, especially like in some yards and stuff like that, some more yards per catch. And so my pick is, I'm going to make it easy. This guy's value right now and where he's going is, it sounds like it's not like crazy low to me, but it's low in my eyes. And it's Deonta Johnson at ECR rank 18. The guy is a target monster. The past 2 seasons, he's been the wide receiver 1 for the Steelers. He dethroned Juju Smith-Schuster in 2021, or 2020, I should say, and proved to be their alpha wide receiver. And he got, like I said, just a lot of targets. He was just peppered, and I think it's going to be that way again. Yes, everybody expects him. He's supposed to be getting a big contract. We don't know, but it sounds like he's going to play. He showed up to mandatory minicamp. He's probably going to play. And right now at ECR 18, that's a value. This guy, I think, I can't remember exactly where he finished last year at ADP.
9.
Okay, so yeah, top 10 wide receiver. And like I said, I think, and it's crazy to think, but Mitch Trubisky, you guys, supported Allen Robinson, who was a top 10 wide receiver too. And he was also a target monster. So I feel like Deonta Johnson, I'm not comparing him exactly to Allen Robinson, but he can still be an alpha receiver. And right now he's getting drafted as a high-end wide receiver 2, mid-round wide receiver 2. And I don't think that's right for the guy who finishes as a wide receiver 9. And, Garrett did the quiz thing last time, and I didn't expect him that high. And it's true because he finished pretty dang good last year. And so that goes actually my void. I'm building off that. And my void is Chase Claypool. And, yeah, he had a down year last year because he was so low in his touchdown category compared to his first year. I think he had like 10 or 11 touchdowns his rookie year. And then last year, I think he only had 2 or 3, I think it was. And it was a big downgrade, but his yards were roughly the same. He still had like 800 yards. But if Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett is the starting quarterback, neither of their guys are big, drop it downfield, drop a nuke. And Kenny Pickett and Chase Claypool that's what he is for this team. He's a home run threat, but we have seen him get some like jet sweeps and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
But he's not like a over the middle quick slant or do a curl. He's trying to hit a post or he's trying to hit a go for the most part. And I don't think Claypool is going to be that guy, or like have that big role with these quarterbacks. I don't think either of these guys are going to be, like I said, chucking it downfield. And the Steelers used 2 high-end picks this year on wide receivers, which was we knew they were going to go for wide receiver, but it was crazy to see them double down like that.
Yeah. And
one of these guys is a burner. They got Calvin Austin in the 4th round out of Memphis, and this dude is probably going to be more, returning punts and stuff like that too. But this dude is speed, and so that's what I think they probably want him to try to do is, get out there once in a while, take the top off a team. But it's funny because all my picks for this, or all my ones that I chose for the Steelers, are all wide receivers. So that my sleeper is George Pickens. And I was really, really high on Pickens earlier. I thought he had a good chance of taking over as wide receiver 2 in this offense because, guys, we talked about George Pickens a little bit. He was projected athleticism-wise a top 4 or 5 in the draft it was, but had some bad interviews, it sounded like, which dropped him into the 2nd round. But the comparison that they used to Pickens early on, guys, like in the rookie camps, was he has the route running in hands of Deonta Johnson and the speed and size of Chase Claypool, which are like, holy crap. Like, they just compared their 2 top guys into one. Yeah, the 2 top guys in Pittsburgh into one. They just morphed them. And so, but we are hearing, it does scare me, and I think that's why his value has dropped so much, is that they don't expect him to be a huge role in the offense this year. Well, I think we've seen with Claypool, or more Deonta Johnson. Johnson's a smaller guy. He's had some little nagging injuries, missed a game or two here. If he misses a game or two and Pickens steps in and balls out or forms a connection right away with like Kenny Pickett or something like that, there's a good chance he can step into a lot larger role. I think he's like really athletic. We've seen Mike Tomlin trust rookies, trust him to like lead the way, like Deonta Johnson and Chase Claypool when they both came, and Juju Smith-Schuster. All these guys were top end picks in the draft, top 3 rounds of picks, and they all had roles in with already high powered weapons there in their rookie years. And I think Pickens is just another Class A example of that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of when I dove into the Steelers, I was thinking a lot of the same things. I like Deonta where he's at. I feel like he's just underrated, and even with these guys stepping in, Deonta built up every single season he's been in the league. Went from 92 targets his rookie year to 144, then to 169. He was second in the league in targets last year, and that's I know Big Ben threw a lot of passes, and I know Najee Harris had a lot of rushes and a lot of dumps offs, but this offense is a good offense. They get the ball moving. They have good playmakers at across the board for running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So even regardless of who's there at quarterback, Deonta is going to be the number one. He's shown that he's the best on the team. Claypool, I am a big Claypool fan actually. Looking at his rookie year compared to last year, he had almost the same amount of receptions, 62 to 59, almost the same amount of targets, 109 to 105, 873 yards to 860 yards. So he's very close his first 2 seasons. The difference was the touchdowns. His rookie year, he had 9 receiving touchdowns. Last year, he had 2. Then he gets involved a little bit in the rushing game because he's such an athlete. They're trying to find different ways to get him involved. And I think that's going to continue throughout the rest of his career. He has shown to have some maturity issues. It sounds like coming out of the locker room, some things going on behind closed doors with Tomlin.
TikTok.
Well, TikTok stuff. I feel like that's going to become the new norm, is like a lot more players are going to be involved with it. But I kind of went the other route with the 2 other receivers, George Pickens and Calvin Austin. They're going pretty late in drafts. Now, George Pickens drafted in the 2nd round, like you said. Great production scores, great metrics. He had his bad injuries at Georgia, but really, he was sought after as a guy who could be a really good a fit to be an alpha in some offenses. Now he lands here where he's a wide receiver 3, and the Steelers have shown that they're willing to take guys along with some attitude issues. They typically iron them out. They keep things in-house for the most part, and they groom these wide receivers to be great. Now, if Deonta Johnson is shown the door next year, it might be because Pickens blossomed. My only trouble is I don't know if the wide receiver 3 in this offense is going to be involved enough to where they're fantasy relevant. So right now I'm just avoiding those 2 guys as sleepers, Pickens and Austin. I like Freiermuth where he's at, tight end 12. I think he could have a similar production as he did last year. But my sleeper is actually Mitch Trubisky, and I think that he's got a good shot at holding down the job over Kenny Pickett. Pickett drafted, later on in the 1st round. He was the first QB taken, but it wasn't like he was this bona fide superstar coming in the league, Mr. Baby Hands himself. But Trubisky, he's also had good rushing numbers his first few years in the league. Going at QB 31, not a guy you draft. But with all the weapons in this offense, Najee Harris, Deonta Johnson, Claypool, Pickens, Austin, Freiermuth, a lot of tools to work with. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a good streaming quarterback that you can play in a good matchup. Like, really, this offense, if they keep moving and if Mike Tomlin keeps them pointed in the right direction, Mitch Trubisky could be a good streaming quarterback to throw in from time to time.
And it sounds like Garrett right now, Kenny Pickett is quarterback 3 on the roster. It sounds like they really want to develop this guy. It sounds like Mason Rudolph is above him at QB2. And I just want to add to your comment with the Trubisky. Steelers spent some money this year in offensive line. And I wouldn't say they're huge names. They got James Daniels from Chicago Bears, who was probably one of the better offensive linemen for the Bears last year. And then Mason Cole. And he's kind of like a center / he can rotate in at guard. But the Steelers' offensive line was not that good last year with a bad, quarterback with mobility. And then, like I said, I think Trubisky, they brought him in here to at least fill the void for this year, I think, like you said, I think he's going to hold it down the job for the majority of the year, if not all the year.
Yeah, and, he did. When he was with the Bears, he wasn't given an opportunity to throw the ball very much. So it's tough to know, his rookie year, he hardly threw the ball at all. And then, he had an opportunity to, go in a little bit more. You mentioned that he was able to keep some guys fantasy relevant. And I think he can do that in this offense. So, we're talking about appropriately priced. At QB 31, it seems like a fine shot. It's not like he's a guy you draft. He's a guy you monitor off the waivers, and especially if you're in, 12 teams or less, he's a guy that you don't need to keep on a roster. You just keep an eye out for a good matchup.
He's a goodwill pickup that turns out to be nice.
Yeah.
he's like when he could potentially be like that goodwill pair of pants that you pick up and you put your hand in the pocket and there's a $20 bill in there. Hey, that might be possible.
Yeah.
And so, guys, with that wraps up. I think, Garrett, I don't think you have anything else here.
No, that's kind of the cap for all I've got.
Yeah, so we're got one more team in the AFC we're going to cover next week. We're going to be talking about the AFC South as our last division in the AFC. And then after that, we move on to the last parts of the NFC. So really hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Garrett, anything else there?
No, that's all I got. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yeah, guys, the surprise that we talked about, unfortunately, mine came today. Garrett's hasn't arrived yet. If you can see the back, we finally got some posters with our emblem and our name of our fantasy podcast for those that you can actually see. For those of you that can actually see us, so we'll have that in the back now. It was something that we needed. We both had kind of bland backgrounds. Garrett should be here by next episode.
Yeah. What's next? We got T-shirts for all of our fans out there.
Yeah, first 10 fans.
Yeah,
that's you, Kyle.
That's you.
Yeah, guys, with that, like I said, we'll be covering the AFC South next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you next time.